Okay, Rick Pearson, so what's closer to the truth here? They're talking about Iran. Obviously, under Trump, they ended the nuclear deal that would have frozen the development of a nuclear weapon. And Vance is saying, well, hey, you've been in power for the last 3.5 years. You haven't deterred them.
Well, but it was what Trump did that basically set up the opportunity for Iran to rebuild its nuclear capabilities. I mean, both sides really are at fault here to some degree on the ability of assets that were converted over to Iran to be able to rebuild, and the lack of accountability over the oversight over their nuclear program. I mean, both sides bear some responsibility here.
Well, I gotta say, I mean, the idea that you heard J.D. Vance say that Donald Trump brought stability, it's laughable on its face. It's laughable on its face. Everyone could see what happened during the Trump years. He's cozying up with Putin in North Korea. Well,
basically what Vance said was Trump scares the hell out of everybody.
Yeah, including J.D. Vance.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that's the deterrent factor from Trump, is he scares the hell out of everybody.
At the same time, we heard them say, I agree. I don't necessarily agree with you, Senator, or disagree with you. Are you surprised at how many times they agree? Does this go to the, like just don't fumble the ball in this debate. You don't have to win, but don't lose.
Well, I think we definitely saw the budding bromance between these two individuals in this debate today, and I think that was because we've seen so much of the acrimony versus when Biden and Trump were on the stage comparing who had a better golf game and getting down to almost childish type antics. But I think that where you have this kind of discourse and you're agreeing, you're not really giving the political differences that people want to know more specifically about. And I think there were plenty of times where we're like, well, yes, I agree with you on this, or I agree with you on that. That's great. But let's talk about the specifics on how do we move forward. We all know that we need more housing. We all know we need a safe Middle East. We all know we need to invest in our communities. But how do we do that? And the devil is always in the details. And to simply say, oh, I agree with you, great. Now how do we fix it?
Well, I also think that, you know, we know that women should be trusted. And that's what I heard Tim Walz say today. And what I heard J.D. Vance do was dance around the idea of a national abortion ban.
Well, he actually was, he's like, we need to win the trust back of women voters, so almost being conciliatory on that issue.
Except he talked about, a number of times he talked about options, and that there should be options for women.
But let's put it into context.
But guess what option isn't on the table? That option for...
Well, I heard him talk about unplanned pregnancies.
In certain states.
But I didn't hear him talk about unplanned miscarriages. I didn't hear him talk about unplanned infertility. So to take away options and then say we have to get women to trust us more is absurd.
And he has made statements that are about as far to the right on the abortion issues as you can be. Tonight, is he trying to reach undecided to say, hey, I'm not as scary as you might fear me to be if you are someone that does believe a woman should have that choice?
Well, I think he's definitely trying to appeal to a broader base by saying we're not as bad as you think we are, while at the same time not being able to articulate why not, or how, fine, if you want more family options, great, let's talk about that. But talk about the whole dynamic that you're allowing to go forward, including a woman's right to choose. If you want to invest in families, if you want to give more options, great, let's talk about that. But show how you're not taking away from what people already have. And that's not what they were trying to do tonight. They were just trying to put lipstick on a pig, so to speak,
and Walz
just to get through this.
Didn't necessarily answer that question about Minnesota's law and whether it allowed termination after 9 months.
Well, fact check that Vance did support a 15-week national federal ban on abortion. Well, when he ran as a candidate, and he denied that he had done that.
He also said that, you know, he spoke about a friend who had, you know, who needed to avail herself of health care. While at the same time, he's standing with a former president who brags about overturning Roe. Like, those two things are very dissonant to me. And that, to me, it points to how slick he is and how he has this snake oil vibe to him that I don't think women bought tonight.
Well, I think it's very like a political chameleon. He is what he needs to be to get through the moment. And I mean, even just seeing the answer on, is democracy at stake? Not being able to answer the most basic question, did you lose? In this business, it's a zero-sum game. Either you win or you lose. And I've been in both situations. But I know when I've lost and when I've won. And not being able to articulate that definitively just shows that you're just saying...
Did anyone win or lose tonight? Or does it just depend on what your point of view is?
I think it's a draw, to be perfectly honest. And I think Vance fumbled it at the end with the democracy question.
And it seems like with our attention spans these days, we're going to forget about all of this in about 24 hours as the next campaign crisis comes into view.